Welcome to another episode of the Attic Fables podcast, where together we discover how to face the ups and downs of life with faith and confidence. In today's episode, I'm going to be exploring the Chinle Rock Formation in northern Arizona. Recently, my wife and I completed an over 9,000 mile road trip to the western United States. We went to Nevada and Arizona. We went to California, up to Oregon, Washington State, Idaho, Montana, and then down into Yellowstone National Park and Wyoming. We visited the Painted Desert and the Petrified Forest and the south rim of the Grand Canyon. We went to Monument National Park where we saw the great sandstone buttes. We went to Arches National Park outside of Moab. We camped at 8,000 feet on Mount Wheeler in the Great Basin of Nevada. We camped at Lake Tahoe on the shores of Lake Tahoe, and we up in California in Lassen Volcanic National Park. It was a wonderful trip where we saw the redwoods and we saw the Grand Columbia River and Yellowstone National Park and the majestic Grand Tetons. And finally we ended up in Wyoming and the granite hills of the Black Hills. It was a wonderful trip, and one of the things that really struck me was the vast stretches of land, miles and miles and hundreds of miles of sandstone and mudstone and limestone and basalt. Vast fields of basalt, old lava beds, and miles and miles of sandstone and limestone. It was just, I never realized how much of our country was covered in these various rocks. One of the first national parks that we stopped at was the Petrified Forest, which includes the Painted Desert. And as you look out upon the Painted Desert, if you've ever been there, you've seen the colorful red rocks and white and various shades of brown and black rock. And this rock formation that you see in the Painted Desert is part of the Chinle Formation. In geological terminology, a formation is a vast body of rock, usually sedimentary rock, that has consistent physical characteristics. This rock formation is distinctive enough for geologists to map it out, and they can tell that there's underlying formation, there's underlying strata of rock, and then there's often overlying strata of rock. And they can see that because of the composition of the rock, because of sometimes they date the rock through fossils and various other ways to measure the age of rocks. And they can see that the various rock formations are very distinctive, and so they name them. And the one that's in the Painted Desert, they've named the Chinle Formation. The Chinle Formation was formed by clay and silt and sand that settled to the bottoms of lakes and rivers that formed a vast wetland during the Upper Triassic epoch, about 200 million years ago. During the Triassic period, North America was part of one huge continent called Pangaea. It was also the time when the first dinosaurs lived. I'll talk more about Pangaea in a subsequent episode. For now, our focus is on the Chinle Formation, but it's important to note that this vast rock formation was formed when the area was much different than it is today. This river system that flowed out of New Mexico, across Arizona and Colorado, and dumped into this sea in Nevada. It carried mud and sand and silt, and so these deposits of sand and mud settled to the bottom of this sea, and eventually were buried by subsequent flows of sediment, and eventually over time this sediment lithified or became rock hard. And this is how the Chinle Formation of the Painted Desert was formed. The area is called the Painted Desert because of the various colors that you see. If you've ever been there, you've seen the reds and the whites and all different shades of colors, browns and even black. The red sandstone is the indication of iron oxide. The white colors are various shales. Some of it is volcanic ash. Now here's a piece of sandstone that I got from Arches National Park outside of Moab, Utah. Now this sandstone is similar to the sandstone of the Painted Desert, but it's much younger. The sandstone of the Chinle Formation in the Painted Desert was formed in wetlands during the Upper Triassic epoch about 200 million years ago. This piece of sandstone from the Arches National Park was formed from wind-blown sand during the Jurassic period about 150 million years ago. So it's at least 50 million years younger than the sandstone that you see in the Painted Desert. Now anyone with a rudimentary knowledge of geology knows that sandstone and mudstone and limestone are sedimentary rock, and these are sandstones and mudstones, shale, chalk, and limestone. Most sandstone is made of small sand-sized grains of feldspar and quartz. Mudstone is similar to sandstone, except that there's more mud or silt in the mudstone and the shales. And limestone, of course, is made from organic materials, the remains of living creatures, shellfish, corals, and algae settled to the bottom of seas and oceans, and eventually deep beds of these organic materials were overlaid by more and more sediment, and they eventually lithified or became hard rock. That's limestone. So the question is, how long did it take these sedimentary rocks to form? How long did it take sandstone formations and the limestone formations to form? In the case of sandstone and mudstone, first we have to have a original rock or a parent rock, and much of this parent rock or original rock before it's eroded, weathered and eroded into grains of sand, most of the parent rock is granite. And so granite is an igneous rock, and it forms from magma pushing up. Various forces allow the magma from inside the mantle of the earth. The magma rises through the crust, and it intrudes into existing rock, and there it cools and forms granite. And over time, through uplift, the granite is uplifted further and further to the surface, And then there is the process of erosion until the granite rock that was formed in the earth, now it's at the surface through uplift, through tectonic forces, push the rock up. That's what forms the mountains. The granite is exposed, it's weathered, and erosion eventually washes the broken fragments of rock down the sides of the mountain, and it's broken up smaller until finally you have small sand grain size pieces of sand, and they're washed down through streams and rivers into lakes and into seas and marshes and other wetlands. And then eventually over time, these sediments that came from the mountains washed down into the wetland, they're buried by subsequent layers of sediment until they're buried deep into the earth, where they are compressed, and through heat and pressure, the sediment of these sands that are mixed with various minerals are cemented together and become rock hard. Most Christians can accept that this process of rock formation, weathering, erosion, sedimentation, and lithification requires lengthy periods of time. Young Earth creationists, however, don't believe that the Earth is much more than perhaps 10,000 years old. And their explanation of how sandstone and mudstone is formed is that it all happened in 1 year during Noah's flood. Limestone is another sedimentary rock. But unlike sandstone and mudstone and shales, limestone is made up of previously living organisms, shellfish and corals and algae. They're organic. They were alive, and they died and settled to the remains of these living organisms, settled to the bottom of wetlands, of seas and oceans and vast lakes. Eventually, the remains are buried by other kinds of sediment. They're compressed. They're lithified, where they become hard as rock. And now that's where you get the limestone from. Most geologists believe that this process of taking living organisms and accumulating in very thick beds of the remains of the shellfish and the corals and the algae takes a long time to pile up and then be buried and then eventually become rock hard. Most geologists say that it took millions of years. One reason why geologists believe that limestone took so long to form is because these beds or these limestone formations are often hundreds of meters thick. Another reason why they believe that the earth is very old is because after the limestone is formed, there must be a period of time where the wetlands dry up for one reason or another. Perhaps it was through the forces in the earth, the tectonic plates converging and pushing and uplifting the bottom of an ocean, lifting it up until it's exposed and where it can be weathered. the seabed is no longer a seabed, but now it's a much higher elevation, and where there is no more water. Maybe you've been at the top of a mountain somewhere. Maybe you've been to Bryce National Park or Zion National Park, or some other rock formation, some other plateau. That it's a flat area that goes out for miles and miles, and on the top of this plateau there's seashells. Well, does that mean that this was once underwater? Well, yes, but what many people fail to understand is that at one time this plateau that is now thousands of feet above sea level was once below sea level, and was pushed up and exposed. And so now you can see the vast limestone formations. The rock of Gibraltar, for instance, is a limestone formation, and there's many of them around the world, where now they're far above sea level. Most Christians accept the fact that these limestone formations took many thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions of years to form. Young Earth creationists, however, do not have an adequate explanation for these limestone formations that are found all around the world. Their only explanation is that it all happened in 1 year during Noah's flood. So what can we say about this discussion of the Chinle Formation in Arizona? The most obvious point is that Christians are divided over how these formations were made and how long did it take for them to form. Many Christians accept the evidence, the geologic evidence, that it took many thousands and thousands and thousands, perhaps millions of years, for the sandstone and mudstone and limestone formations to form. Young Earth creationists, however, those Christians who believe that the earth is not more than say 10,000 years old, they believe that these rock formations were made during Noah's flood in just 1 year. Now, these two different conclusions demand a different response. For the Christians who believe that it took hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years to form these great thick sandstone and mudstone and limestone formations, they must wrestle with an interpretation of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, where we read that God created the world in 6 days, 6 24-hour days. They must come up with some kind of an interpretation. And there's various theories, various interpretations. One is called the gap theory. We won't go into these theories today, but perhaps in another episode we can talk about them. There's the gap theory, there's the day-age theory, and then there's the framework theory. My own belief is similar to the framework theory, a variation, and I'll talk about that in another episode. For those Christians who believe that the earth was created exactly the way that the Bible says, in 6 literal days, 6 24-hour days, those Christians almost overwhelmingly are in the young earth creationist camp, who believe that the earth is not more than 10,000 years old. For those Christians, they must come up with somehow try to explain the vast sedimentary rock formations. How did they come about? If it wasn't hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years, how could it happen in only 10,000 years for these rocks to form? That's the challenge for the young earth creationist. My question for you is what do you believe and why? Why do you believe it? Have you taken time to consider all the implications of your belief? And that's my challenge for you, is to think through what you believe. Is it reasonable? And is it backed by sound scientific fact? Because the Bible and science are not opposed to one another. The facts are the facts. The rocks do not lie. They're there for your interpretation. They're there for your study, just as the Bible is there for our study and interpretation. We have to make sense of the world we live in. We have to look at the world around us, and somehow we have to blend what we see around us, the world around us, and we have to take the truth of the natural revelation as God reveals himself through nature. We have to take the natural world and somehow blend it with the scriptures. And that's my challenge to you. What do you believe about the age of the earth, and why do you believe it? Well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode of the Attic Fables podcast. Until next time, remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what you've done, God loves you.